Let's face it, brown isn't one of the most glamorous colours, but today on the Hobby Grotto, I'm going to show you how I paint it and why I think it's one of the best colours for base coating your minis. Firstly, let's talk about Rhinox hide because this is the essential ingredient to everything we're doing here. I've mentioned before that I think Rhinox hide is one of GW's best paints, and with good reason. A dark brown is always going to be a useful colour because it works so well as a base, and Rhinox has a lovely rich red undertone to it which adds to its versatility. Now, because brown is so rarely a feature colour, we don't need heaps of different shades and varieties, but there are two other browns I find incredibly useful. The first one is XV88. I use this as a base a lot too, such as for yellows and bone, as well as a standalone colour, but when it comes to Rhinox hide, XV88 is great for mixing in highlights, or even just going for a straight dry brush over the top of the darker brown, particularly useful for furs, clothing, and terrain among other things. Another colour I think is very important in the brown toolkit is something like Doomball brown, a nice red brown that you can use to add warmth to your existing browns, or also as a base for brown adjacent colours such as orange or rusty metallics, but mainly you want that standard dark and light brown, which is covered with the Rhinox and XV88, and you can do the rest with mixing. When it comes to base coating with brown, I like to overbrush it onto a black undercoat, and this is actually going to build our first level of shading. An overbrush is just a more consistent dry brush. You're not wiping as much paint off the brush, but because it's still a form of dry brushing, you're going to keep that black undercoat in the deepest cracks and crevices and establish a base level of shading. You can definitely use an airbrush or rattle can for this step instead, but I really like the effects you get from dry brushing, particularly for building that shading and having control over the amount of brown going on. Of course, it also needs to be mentioned that I'm using Citadel paints here as an example, but you can definitely use a similar paint from another range. Whatever is going to be easy for you is the way to go. After that, a lighter brown can be dry brushed on sparingly to build another layer, and what we're kind of creating here is a dark version of a zenithal, but this lighter shade is not always necessary. If you've got lots of brown on the model, it might be a great time saver, or you might even want to do a dry brush with a more red brown like the Doomball I mentioned previously. It all just kind of depends on the overall look you're going for on the Mini. Now, this technique has quite a few positive effects. Firstly, we're getting lots of little details out of the way early on. Generally, miniatures have pouches, belts, straps, all that stuff, and by hitting the model with an overbrush of brown, we're not going to need to come back and paint all this stuff later, which is great because these little details are fiddly and rarely focal points anyway. If you're trying to get your minis out fast, you really don't want to be getting bogged down with that stuff, so starting with a brown base coat is primarily an excellent time saver on the right Mini. Sometimes if I'm not sure which direction I'm going to head with a Mini, I just start with a brown dry brush base, then at least there's some colour on the model and you can evolve it from there. I mean, there's probably going to be some brown bits. For other colours on the Mini, this is also going to provide a nice base to work off. Lots of colours do well over browns because it's a neutral colour and often complements the subsequent layers as a base. At the minimum, it's going to provide some solid shading and undertones. The other great thing about starting with a dry brush base is that it enables you to see all the detail of the model even clearer, and this really helps when you're painting, particularly with how detailed some of these new minis can be. You're getting a bunch of things on the model painted quickly and giving yourself an easier time identifying what's actually going on with the model. Bonus. Of course, brown isn't always the best colour to start with. Another colour that's very useful for base coats is metallic silver. You can see more about that in this video here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Hobby Grotto.